Hello and welcome. This is the sewing instructional video for the Tetiana K Studio Scalloped Yoke skirt, the non-stretch invisible zipper option. Here I have both versions cut and ready to go. The elastic waist version can only be used with stretch materials and also requires a 4 or 5 thread serger. The non-elastic version with the invisible zipper can be used for stretch or non-stretch material and also requires only a single needle. A serger is optional. The link for the elastic waistband version is down in the description below. We start at the iron by applying fusible interfacing to our waistband. Once the interfacing is applied, then we press a fold into the waistband along the full length. The next step is to finish all the edges of all the pieces with a serger. This step is optional. The next step is to connect the skirt panels together in a series of 3s. So there'll be 2 sets of 3s. 3 connected together for the front and 3 connected together for the back. The important thing to note here is that you need to start your stitch below the edge. So we don't start the stitch at the seam allowance. We start it where the seam allowances meet. So you'll see me here pointing it out with the pin. And we start there because it's going to make it a lot easier for us when we're connecting the yoke to the skirt panels. It's going to make it much easier for us to make those nice points of the scalloped yoke. And I always like to do a nice long back stitch at the start of that seam. That's because this is the point we're going to be pivoting for the corner of the yoke, so we need to have it nice and sturdy. So here you'll see I've completed connecting my panels together, and at the top the stitch doesn't go all the way up at the top. There's the 2 panels separate at the top, and that's where we're going to be pivoting our scalloped yoke points. And now we connect the 3rd panel exactly the same way, and that'll complete the front panels. And next I'll do the exact same thing for the 3 back panels. Now at the iron we're going to open up all those seams and press them open that we just did between the panels. And I'm also going to press out any wrinkles I have in the fabric. Now is the best time to do it. The next step is to connect the yoke to the skirt panels, and this is one of the trickiest parts of this whole skirt. Keep in mind that you're connecting 2 curves together. So there's going to be some easing. It's going to be a little tricky, so go nice and slow. You might even want to consider doing a large stay stitch first before doing the final stitch. It's up to you, just depends on your skill level. I find it easier to keep the panels on top of the yoke when I'm sewing. It gives me more visibility because it's very important to make a nice sharp point that connects directly to the panel line. So when I have the panels on top and the yoke underneath when I'm sewing, it's much easier for me to see where my needle is going. So as you can see, I'm lining up that point between the panels with the point of the yoke, and that's where we're going to pivot. As I get to my first point, I slow down, and to create that nice point in the yoke, I have to make sure that my needle hits the seam between the panels. Ideally, you want your needle to hit about a 1/16 or maximum an 1/8 below where that seam splits. Once I have that needle down in the seam between the panels, I keep it down and I lift my foot and I pivot. I pivot the yoke underneath and I pivot the panels on top to direct myself to sew the next scallop. So creating that point in the scalloped yoke. And when you're going to sew the next scallop after you've pivoted, just be very careful, go very slowly, and make sure that all the layers underneath and on top are laying nice and flat. And having that little notch on top of the panels that we left when we were sewing the panels together is going to make it really easy for you to make those nice pivot points and create the nice points on the yoke. And I'm going to show you this again a little bit closer up. And you can see as I'm coming close to that point, I'm just making sure it's right in the right place, and I'm going very slowly until I get that needle exactly where I want it inside that seam between the panels. And I'm leaving my needle down and lifting the foot. You can see that it's exactly in that seam. And here I'll pivot. Yep, so moving my yoke, turning it, and turning the panels on top to line myself up to sew the next scallop, the rounded part of the yoke. And again, I'm making sure that all the layers are nice and flat. Then we'll go to the ironing board and press open all those seams on the yoke that we just did, and that will make the corners even nicer and sharper. Here is how the scallop yoke points look on the wrong side once they're pressed. And here is what it looks like on the right side of the fabric. The next step is to join the front and the back together on one side seam. The other side seam is where we'll have our zipper. You can then go ahead and press open that side seam as well. Now it's time to join our waistband and our skirt together. The waistband has a notch in the middle, which meets with the side seam that's already sewn. Once the waistband is on, you can go to your iron and press that seam open all along the length. Now it's time to insert our invisible zipper. There are many variations on inserting an invisible zipper depending on your machine or the type of foot you like to use. I'm just going to show mine, and hopefully it'll be complementary or helpful to your own. I start by attaching my invisible zipper foot, and first I'll be working on attaching the left side of the zipper. So with the zipper unzipped, I line up the zipper teeth and the little plastic bit on top with the fold in the waistband. Then I sew just a quick stay stitch all down the length of the zipper, going down to the notch and a little bit past the notch. So once I hit the notch, the zipper notch, I taper away and to the edge of the seam allowance, going about 1/2 inch past the notch. If you wanted to put a hook and eye on top of your zipper, you might want to line up the zipper teeth a little bit down, maybe 1/4 of an inch of an 1/8 of an inch down, to leave room for that hook and eye at the top of the zipper. Once I've secured that side of the zipper with my stay stitch, I'll go back and sew the actual stitch that makes the zipper invisible, which goes under the teeth. So I'll start at the end of the stay stitch and taper back to my notch, and then roll the teeth away as I sew up all the way to the top of the zipper to that plastic piece. I stop at the little plastic piece on top of the zipper. Then I will fold over the little extra bit of the zipper that's on top. I'll fold that over and place a stay stitch to kind of keep it out of my way. Now that the left side of the zipper is attached, I'm going to work on the right side, and I want to make sure that the style lines where the waistband meets the yoke and then the curve of the yoke line up at the zipper. I'll do this by placing pins on the seam allowance of the zipper where those style lines are before I sew the other side. And here's what that looks like when I have both my pins in to line up with the waistband and the yoke style lines. Then I can unzip the zipper and flip the other side of the zipper that's not attached yet to the other side of the skirt. In order to avoid fraying our fabric or damaging our fabric if we're having multiple attempts of lining up our style lines, I always start by switching my stitch to a 4 or 5 length and doing a stay stitch to first make sure that those style lines are lined up before I do an actual stitch. So the stitch you see me doing, I'm doing it in a longer stitch, and this is actually my second attempt. The first attempt the style lines didn't line up perfectly, but here on the second attempt, I've got them just right, lining up nicely. I can switch my stitch to the normal length, like 2.5 to 3 millimeters. And I go back over that stitch all the way from the top, from the little plastic piece, rolling the teeth away all the way down to the notch and tapering away past the notch. And I'll go back and I'll do a quick run stitch down the length of that zipper to attach the zipper seam allowance to the skirt seam allowance, just so it matches the other side. And while I do that, I will turn that little tab at the top of the zipper down and stay stitch it as well. And this is how my zipper is looking now. So the waistband at the top just needs to be finished, and the side seam below the zipper needs to be finished. So that's what we'll do next. We'll close the side seam starting at the hem, and I'm still using my zipper foot because it allows me to get really close to the bottom of my invisible zipper. So this stitch we're doing from the bottom of the hem of the side seam up to the invisible zipper. And when I get close to the invisible zipper, I just slow down and make sure I'm not catching any of it in my seam. And this is what that whole stitch looks like. And here's a close-up of where the seam ends. And you'll see that it doesn't meet that curve of the zipper stitch, which is totally fine. As long as it's 1/8 or less, then it'll still look good on the other side. And again, I'm still using the zipper foot to secure the waistband at the top. So on both sides, I'll flip that waistband on itself, and I'm kind of encasing the zipper between the fold of the waistband and then stitching it to secure the waistband corners. And here I've secured both corners of the waistband, and then I can go ahead and flip them. And here's how our zipper top is looking like at the waistband. Then we'll just quickly press open that side seam. The next step is to finish the waistband, and for this part, this is one of the places I do use a lot of pins. I go around and fold my waistband and just make sure it's nice and flat, and I pin both layers together, but I try not to let the pins cross the waistband seam because that's where we'll be securing it. And here's my waistband pinned all around and ready to sew. So to secure the waistband to itself, again, I'm still using the zipper foot, and this allows me to get really close to the seam without going over the seam. You can also use the stitch in the ditch method and sew on top of the skirt in the waistband seam. I find my method much easier and also kind of dummy proof because if you make a mistake, it's easier to take out and easier to see, and just overall you don't have to worry about, fraying your fabric if you're sewing on the right side. Here we're just sewing on the inside, we're just attaching the seam allowance layers together. So it's a very beginner friendly quote unquote hack. I'm stitching together the inside layer of the waistband to the seam allowance of the skirt. And I just sew those layers all along the waistband, and all the pins that I'm using there are making sure that my waistband doesn't come out twisted or warped or in any way. And the stitch ends and begins about 1/2 inch away from the zipper. You don't need to get super close. There might be a tiny little hole there, but it doesn't matter because it won't change the look or the function of the skirt. And if you ever need to take the stitch out, it's much easier to find the beginning and undo it there. And here's our finished waistband. Now we can switch back to a regular foot to complete the last step, which is the hem. Here I'm doing a 1/2 inch turned up hem, and because my fabric has a little bit of stretch, I'm able to do this. If your fabric has absolutely no stretch, you might not be able to do this because the outer edge of the seam allowance is bigger than the inner circle where you're putting that stitch in, so there's going to be some bunching. So if you're having trouble with the hem not laying properly, you may want to consider doing a smaller hem, so you can do like a 3/8 or 1/4 turn on the hem. Or if you want to have a more elegant finish with a wider hem, you can do a bias hem finish. And lastly, we'll give that whole skirt a nice press, including the hem and the zipper, and now it's finished and ready to wear. Thank you for watching and purchasing Tetiana K patterns. Please like and subscribe to see new content and designs as they come out. I would love to see what you create. Please share with me at Tetiana K Studio on Instagram. Bye.